we at Bloomberg, especially at Bloomberg News, spend a lot of time and effort trying to cover Google and keep up with it. That doesn't in any way preclude our common commitment to free speech and to transparency, and certainly to transparency with regard to governments and providing information to as large a population as possible. I think all of us, or each of us, has a eureka moment when you realize that everything has changed, that everything is different. And for me, it came to me somewhat late. Last December, I went to Tunisia and spent a day about 150 miles south of Tunis in a small city called Sidi Bouzid, where in December of 2010, a young fruit vendor had self-immolated because the government there had seized his scale. So he was actually protesting regulation when he set himself on fire. That event itself was not all that significant. There was a small protest a couple days later of maybe a dozen of his fellow fruit vendors, but what was significant was that he had a cousin who had a video camera and, more importantly, a Facebook account and access to YouTube. And that video camera recorded that small demonstration that rather quickly led to significant riots in Tunisia, and within 2.5 weeks, the authoritarian president who had been in control of the country for 20 years was out of office. And that event is one of the things that is most frequently referred to as a catalyst for the so-called Arab Spring and for all of the turmoil across the Mideast over the last few years. What I found particularly significant was last September, less than 2 years after that event, the American embassy in Tunisia was set on fire, and the American school was destroyed by Salafists who were protesting a YouTube film that they thought had been adverse to Islam and had portrayed Islam in an unfair light. And so I think we saw in that, if you will, two extremes, the ways in which the power of social media, the power of mobility, the ability to use video cameras to transmit to smartphones, had really extraordinarily broadened public information and public attitudes, and at the same time, the kinds of emotions and the kinds of threats to democracy that can result from subsequent events showed to me the same kind of significance. And I think in looking at the role of the press, the role of speech in the internet, it is certainly important to think about just the power that has been unleashed. It never ceases to amaze me to see how quickly things are moving. I was managing editor of the Wall Street Journal in 1985 when we were using Royal typewriters and 10-ply carbon to prepare our stories and send them by 6-level teletype to a printing plant about 200 miles away. I remember Andy Grove from Intel coming to visit and looking at this, marveling, and saying, "This is so wonderful, it should be in the Smithsonian." And you think about the fact that David incorporated Google in 1998. Soon after that, Bill Gates spoke about how search was a passing fancy that really had no future, so Microsoft didn't have to worry about it. There was no YouTube, there was no Twitter, there was no Facebook. And so when we think about where we are going from here, I think it's important that we establish common principles and ideals that we want to adhere to, that we think are global, but I think we also have to acknowledge the speed with which technology is changing our game very quickly and how malleable we're going to have to be to keep up with it. And I hope that these are themes that we get a chance to explore further today. Thanks so much for letting me join you.